iPhone 14 Pro Max versus iPhone 14 Pro 1 year later. Now, when these first came out, I did a full comparison between both these devices, but I've had both of them now for a year. You could see those always on displays right there. And I want to talk to you about what I think about each and which one was the better experience after that year of usage. So we're going to run through a few categories here and I'll give you my explanation which one I thought was better. We're going to start with the price point. So the iPhone 14 Pro Max started at like $1099, whereas the iPhone 14 Pro started at $999. Now we are rumored to see price hikes on both the smaller 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max or Ultra, whatever it's going to be called. This is going to go up maybe $200. This is going to go up maybe $100. So they're getting higher this year for sure. So this was probably the last year you're going to see the entry level $1,000 Pro. And let's talk about why I thought the iPhone 14 Pro Max was the better option. For just $100 more, you get the bigger screen experience and the better battery life. So for me, it's very hard to justify and recommend someone pick this phone over this phone unless you just have to have that smaller size because the price difference is not massive. Now this year, if they do decide to go to a $200 price gap where they increase it $200, now that's a kind of a bigger difference there. But there's probably going to be more zoom maybe on the Max this year. So that can be a reason to get that. But yeah, the price wise, after 1 year, I gotta say, I'm happier with my decision on the iPhone 14 Pro Max than this. I don't feel like, this does feel like $1,000 phone, but I just feel like for just $100 more, you're getting a better deal here, especially considering neither of these were battery champs. This one was just fared better than this phone right now. When it comes to design, I feel like, well, obviously they're both the same design. I think that I like the iPhone 14 Pro Max better here, and here's why. Both of these phones, including the iPhone 14 Pro, were quite heavy devices, so you definitely felt the weight of both of them, but I feel like it's more felt in the 14 Pro, and the reason why is that the Apple iPhone 14 Pro has just more weight kind of compacted into this smaller size, so it feels more dense to me. Whereas the iPhone 14 Pro Max, it's spread across this larger body, so it's dispersed a little bit better, essentially making it feel kind of more in place, meaning that I don't expect the phone at this size to feel this heavy. So I'm not saying it's unmanageable, nowhere near that. All I'm saying is that the iPhone 14 Pro feels like a little brick, whereas I kind of expect the iPhone 14 Pro Max to feel heavy because of its size and its weight and stuff. But I think in terms of just that area, this one's going to the 14 Pro Max for me. Now, carrying it around though, I do think the iPhone 14 Pro is a nicer look. It's just smaller, more compact. It looks more, sleek. It's just a nice carry around phone. But the benefits that you lose by going to this one are the smaller screen, which is not as useful to me as the larger screen. And again, for only $100 price difference, you are getting yourself worse battery life. So it was tough to recommend in that area, but it's still pretty amazing device overall in terms of the cameras, the screen, and the performance. Okay, so from the display perspective, it's pretty much a draw when we're talking about just the actual quality of each panel, but I don't think it's a draw in the sense of usability, and that's because the Max is giving you more space once again, and this is, I think, leading to why people continue to choose the larger iPhone. It's just for almost the same money, why not get bigger? Better for media, better for seeing things on display. However, consider that there might be a little bit more people buying the Pros this year, the regular Pros, as the price increase might scare some customers away from the upcoming model, the upcoming 15 Pro Max. But the dynamic island entering this year, right here, you could see it up at the top, definitely made the Max more desirable to me as well, because I always say that when you have a smaller phone, you notice it more. It's the same like with the 13 mini. You notice the notch more than you notice it on like a 13 Pro Max. But in terms of brightness, it's pretty much a draw. Both of them hit 2000 nits. Usable is like 1000 to 1500, but in sunlight they hit 2000. Both ProMotion, both super smooth. There is a sharpness benefit to the 14 Pro, giving you a little bit more pixels per inch. But the truth of the matter is nobody really ever notices that or even mentions that. That's just something that you used to notice when phones were getting more upgrades in terms of screens. Nowadays, they all look basically the same. It's just like, what size do you want, basically. So 1 year later, when it comes to software, I gotta say that I actually had, I don't know for some reason, I don't know why, but I had more crashes on my iPhone 14 Pro Max early on. These days, I don't have any lag issues with either. Apple's done a ton of updates on these phones, and it shows. I don't really ever get crashes, and if I do, it's probably based on a certain application that's not properly designed for the iPhone 14 Pro Max. And so, with that being said, I gotta say that the iPhone 14 Pro Max has been pretty darn solid with the performance. I didn't have no issues with my 14 Pro, oddly enough. I maybe had like one app crash. Some people say that their iPhone 14 Pros have been giving them like battery drain, like for not even using the phone. I haven't experienced that, but if you have, let me know below. I will tell you though that the A16 in here in both of these phones has been ridiculously good. I mean, you could edit out videos super fast on here. You can take 4K content. Now, when you're doing stuff like this, when you're using 4K video, and then you're going to go ahead and go over to iMovie, edit this thing out, then upload it to the YouTube application, I mean, you're going to start draining battery pretty quick. But it can handle these things just like a MacBook. I will say rendering on these phones and performance was not as fast as an M series chip. So if you're looking for the fastest render speeds and you want to go pro like that, it's not going to be as fast on these. Software though, widgets are essentially the same, but I think it's a better experience on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. And the reason why is because you can add about the same, but they just look bigger. Everything looks bigger on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. One thing I don't really like about it though is that, I really don't like about the Max is that it doesn't take advantage of screen space. Yeah, you can kind of have the split views in the settings application on here, which is not found on the smaller iPhone 14 Pro. But at the same time, the smaller iPhone 14 Pro just feels like it was more made, like iOS doesn't do any like multitasking stuff. So it just kind of feels like it was made for a simple phone, like size phone, like the iPhone 14 Pro. So I just really wish Apple would bring some kind of multitasking stuff to take advantage of it. It doesn't have to be all crazy difficult like some of the Samsung stuff, or just a little bit like making your users think that it's hard to use. Just bring something like you do with the iPad OS on here. Just make it like some kind of multitasking feature, because it really doesn't offer anything to give me a good screen experience on the iPhone 14 Pro Max in terms of taking advantage of it. So yeah, that's basically all I have to say about software. They're both going to get the same long updates, and they both have the same camera software as well. From a performance perspective, I do have to say that the iPhone 14 Pro Max and the 14 Pro are the same in terms of the specification. But if you look, there's a little bit more memory use available for the iPhone 14 Pro right here over the 14 Pro Max, which is weird in Geekbench. Maybe it's because of iOS 17 over here, iOS 16.6. There's no difference in performance besides one area, and that's that you feel the heat more on the iPhone 14 Pro when it heats up. And that's mostly because of the same reason I talked about earlier, is that the heat dispersion, or the size of the phone, gives you more space to let the heat disperse around the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So if you're really pushing the 14 Pro hard, it takes a lot to get this phone to warm up. You're going to be doing heavy stuff or running at full brightness max on a charger while doing something. You'll feel it more just because it's a smaller phone. You're just going to feel that heat a little bit more. Other than that, performance has been identical on both, besides the little bit more app crashes for some reason I was having on my 14 Pro Max a year later. And now when it comes to the camera department, obviously they got the same camera, the same exact results. I just want to talk about the difference in experience between using both of them a year later and which one I would recommend. I found that the iPhone 14 Pro Max is the better camera for studio or for, traveling and stuff. If you want to see like a big viewfinder, maybe you're taking a lot of people photos, because you have a bigger area of screen here to go ahead and see what you're framing. But other than that, they're basically the same results here. Like I say, if you're putting this phone on a tripod, kind of like I have this camera, if you're placing this on a tripod and you're using this for heavy cinematic work, or you're doing video work, or you're just doing anything where you want to really take advantage of the camera, like seriously, I would pick the iPhone 14 Pro Max, because the camera experience, is going to drain battery life if you're using it heavy. And with that being said, the iPhone 14 Pro was the better experience for me when moving about, when just going from location to location, just taking a quick photo, snapping around. I mean, it's going to give you the same results. And I just kind of like its more portability, its more private feel. I just feel like more people are going to see what you're taking a photo of on a larger screen. It's just pretty obvious that if you're taking a photo and somebody's walking by, you got this big old screen right here, they're more likely to see what you're doing than on this smaller iPhone 14 Pro. But the 14 Pro not having the best battery life drains more battery, not necessarily more, but it faster than the iPhone 14 Pro Max in camera. So that's basically the difference. We don't need to show video samples and results here. You know what those are like. We did those in the review already. But just overall, the framing easier to see on the iPhone, better for tripod use. I think the iPhone 14 Pro better for portability on the move, on the go, more privacy with your camera, stuff like that. It's just smaller, not by a ton, but definitely a little bit. The mini is the best for that area though. And one of the biggest things I think everybody's waiting to see is how big do the batteries get on the next versions of the iPhone, because neither of these were battery champs. But the iPhone 14 Pro specifically felt kind of because this phone drained much faster than the iPhone 14 Pro Max, but it just was never a really long all-day battery phone for me. And that's kind of annoying because the 13 Pro, the prior version, was. Some people will make it through the day with the iPhone 14 Pro easily if you're not on your phone a lot. I am talking from the perspective of somebody who's using their phone a lot. And if you are, I wouldn't recommend the iPhone 14 Pro for those of you who are basically doing stuff, busy a lot. You're not a heavy phone user all day type stuff, but still want good premium performance. But I would recommend the iPhone 14 Pro Max easily if you're going to be using it heavy. Now, a lot of people complain that this phone doesn't make it the full day, but a year later, after several updates, I can easily make it the day with the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Does it finish with a ton left? No, it doesn't. It's not like the 13 Pro Max finishing with like 56%. This thing is down in the 30s for me by the end of the day. So this is like a decrease from the 13 Pro Max, but it's still far better than this phone right here. So no question about it. Bigger size battery, more efficiency with that. The iPhone 14 Pro Max blew away the iPhone 14 Pro. And here's the thing, $100 more to blow away that phone in the battery, there's no question about it. This is the winner for me in that area. So the audio performance was similar, but a little bit louder on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. This phone right here had the same phone call quality as the 14 Pro, but again, a slightly louder speaker, so that was a little bit better. 5G performance, really good, but not as good as the Samsung phones still. Like the Samsung phones still give me a little bit better signal strength when out and about. I will tell you, wrapping this up though, this experience was very similar. It's just which size. It's kind of like, do you want a smaller SUV or do you want a larger SUV? You want a smaller car or a bigger car? It's the same car, just one's bigger, one's smaller. That's kind of what it feels like here. But at the end of the day, when I'm looking through and really diving deep into the experience, I got to tell you, for the price, the value proposition was stronger for me. It's hard to look at this for $100 less and think it's worth it versus something like this. The iPhone 14 Pro Max gave me longer battery life. The camera experience was bigger, so that was pretty great. And to me, just having that alone was a clear winner in my book versus some portability advantages, which are definitely big for the iPhone 14 Pro. But I feel like this is a phone that you would buy, you would spend the money, you would be probably a little bit disappointed with the battery life and then be like, I need to upgrade my iPhone within like 2 years because you decided to go with this model. I think the iPhone 14 Pro is a better investment, or Max is a better investment I think the Max is a better investment for the longer term just because it can last longer throughout the day and you're not going to be craving that battery upgrade. So that's it for me with the iPhone 14 Pro Max versus the iPhone 14 Pro after 1 year. I hope this may help you decide which one you want to go with if you're still going to choose between these as the new ones come out and these get cheaper. Thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'll catch you all in the next episode. Nick here. Be sure to be well and peace.